The American people just get screwed coming and going, and then they want to point and scream, oh my God, communists and fascists everywhere. Well, how come people don't have faith in the center? Because the center is Bill Clinton. Rape you and bite you on the face. Is George W. Bush send your son to war to die?
Mr. Horton may believe that the US is the source and cause of evil in the world. I disagree.
Okay.
Remember on September 12th, they held a 1 million-man candlelight vigil in downtown Tehran on behalf of the people of the United States. We had the entire world ready to listen to America, ready to join up in our cause, but it wasn't the right cause. It was, hey, you know what we could do? We could get a bonus war. People are so upset about the 3,000 dead New Yorkers, we could exploit that grief and fear. And we could overthrow whoever we want now.
I didn't realize Scott Horton was catching bodies for as long as he has been. Just absolutely embarrassing for Bill Kristol. One of these neocon freaks. Scott Horton is going to embarrass him over and over again. It's like a stern father giving a serious talking to a baby.
Well, today we have the honor of speaking to Scott Horton, the man who crushes warhawks and neocons like none other. Horton is the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, and host of the Scott Horton Show from scotthorton.org. He's also the author of several books, including Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia, and the catastrophe in Ukraine. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
It's my pleasure. And by the way, as if you're not accomplished enough, you are launching a new project. It's called the Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy, which we will talk about in just a moment. But before we do, I figured it makes sense to kind of get your thoughts on two big things that have happened in the past week. First, I wanted to start off with your thoughts on the election results last night. And then I wanted to also get your thoughts on basically this insane effort, this very well-organized effort to destroy Tucker Carlson over the fact that he had a conversation with Nick Fuentes. Let's start off with the election though. Zoran Mamdani is getting a lot of attention. There was an organized effort to basically smear him as a jihadist. Why do you think those efforts didn't work?
Well, because they're just so blatantly false. It's like when Trump, when he ran against Biden in 2020, and he tried to frame Biden as a far leftist radical, which made him what? The steward of the status quo? When the whole thing was Biden is the center left liberal permanent Washington establishment guy, and that Trump was supposed to be the radical shaking things up, right? And so it got the narrative all wrong, and it didn't work because it was just so blatantly false. Joe Biden's a communist? Strom Thurmond's friend? No, he's got a lot of problems, but that's not what it's about. So it's that same kind of thing. In this case, this guy really is a communist, or at least a socialist, and not a jihadist. Or if I don't know, if how religious he is or not or whatever, but he's certainly not here to wage war for Bin Ladenite terrorism against American society. That's not what's dangerous about him. It's his economics, which I would disagree with. Perhaps you have more in common with his economic program than I would, but I would say that his victory is due to two obvious major things, and they're connected to our next subject with Tucker as well, which is one, the Israel lobby and the focus on Israel in the campaign. I read a little bit today about how Cuomo, who by the way is just an absolutely horrific and horrible candidate and should have never been in there in the first place, but how he really ran on, this guy doesn't love Israel enough. Like that was really the basis of his campaign, even after the disastrous debate where they all said Israel, 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 Israel. And Mamdani said, well, I just care about New York City and I want to make New York City a better place. And that got such a huge reaction. And then what did Cuomo do? Israel, 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 Israel the whole time. And then I just watched a report about how, 32%, so just shy of 1/3 of New York Jews that voted for Mamdani. So, and many of them, I don't know exactly how the Venn diagram of the proportions line up, but many of them said because of the Israel issue, meaning they are against Netanyahu and against what has been happening there and support him because he also is against that. And so it just goes to show how completely bankrupt and idiotic it was for Cuomo to run to make that the centerpiece of his thing. Where again, I disagree with Mandami's prescriptions for what should be done. But what did he run on? The quality of life for the people of New York City, and how he wants to make it better because at least he's considered the fact that they might need some improvement in their standard of living rather than just being thrown to some wolves. Where Cuomo apparently doesn't care about them anymore. He cares about the grandmas that he sent with COVID home to all the retirement homes with all the other grandmas that kill them too. And so it's just, and it's a huge part of what has discredited also the Republicans this whole time. Because Trump ran on America First. But MAGA, of course, is a coalition of America First and Israel Instead. And it's America First out here in the country, and it's Israel Instead there in Washington, D.C. and inside the White House. And so it gets to a point after he got his ceasefire and then let the Israelis restart the war and inflict the blockade and then let us get into what, thanks to the Ayatollah, in great part turned out to be a very short war because he decided to basically not fight back when America jumped in Israel's war against Iran. And you have all this time, still prices on the shelf for food to eat for your family keeps going up and up. And what does Donald Trump do? He wages war if he has to against the Federal Reserve to make them keep lowering interest rates, to, in other words, increase inflation because he's too afraid of the correction. He'd rather have high inflation than a recession. And since those are the breaks in a fractional reserve system like we have, our corrupt monetary system, he would rather just keep inflating until it's somebody else's problem. Like George Bush almost got away with in 2008, but not quite. And that's what he's going for. But that means the standard of living for the American people is getting further and further and further out of reach. Tucker Carlson, and this goes to your second question about Tucker Carlson. This is why people love him so much, because everybody knows he was born rich and is this kind of waspy guy and whatever. But he cares, obviously, about the people of this country. He talks about the standard of living. He talks about where did everybody's jobs go and how people are addicted to drugs and their friends and family are dying, and how clearly the government in Washington doesn't care about us. And he was the one who pointed out the statistic that the average age now in America of first-time home ownership, first-time home buyers, is 38 years old. 38.
It's crazy.
That's why, people were talking about on Halloween, how come there's no suburban streets full of kids trick-or-treating? Because all the young families with kids are living in apartments. They don't have a suburb to go out and to live in because Donald Trump won and Joe Biden increased the money supply by a third in the name of making up for the COVID lockdowns. They then waged these massive bailouts and inflated the money supply and caused this massive inflation. So the American people just get screwed coming and going, and the party leadership, the liberals and the conservatives, the entire center have just refused to respond to the needs and the wishes, the outright, foot stomping demands of the American people. And so the American people, especially the younger, are moving further and further to the left and to the right. And then they want to point and scream, oh my God, communists and fascists everywhere. Well, how come people don't have faith in the center? Because the center is Bill Clinton. Rape you and bite you on the face. It's George W. Bush, send your son to war to die. Barack Obama, who will back Al-Qaeda and create a caliphate. Right? These people, John McCain and Joe Biden and Donald Trump won again, created so much money, is a third of all the money that's ever been created of US dollars. This is the basis of the inflationary crisis. This is why people are living outside. People who are not bums, people with houses, people who used to have houses that they owned, people who they couldn't afford the adjustable rate mortgage type situation, or they couldn't afford their rent went up, and even they have jobs. When they talk about cutting SNAP, I don't know exactly what the proportion is, but it's a huge proportion of the people on food stamps have jobs.
That's right.
They still cannot make ends meet, and it's because of the inflationary money. I know that's not y'all's favorite topic, it's mine, but it's a huge part of what's wrong with this country.
It's actually one of my favorite topics, and we're headed for stagflation actually, because with the development of AI, Unemployment is definitely shooting up right now. And you also have companies that are downsizing in response to Trump's weird, trade wars and tariff policy that I can't really understand. There's no real strategy there, right? And so there's already shortages of pharmaceutical drugs. We've been relying on foreign countries to manufacture our pharmaceutical drugs. And because of these trade wars, we're starting to see shortages. I mean, it is a complete and utter disaster. And I agree with you when it comes to the central banks. I mean, when you look at the stock market, for instance, it's just a massive bubble. It's an asset bubble. And you're right, everyone's afraid of the correction. Yep. But you need the correction. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just say right here that this is so fantastic. This part of this conversation is so important to me because, other than foreign policy, what I want everyone to agree with libertarians about is just this one thing. You don't have to agree with us about the welfare state. Hell, you don't have to agree with us about the warfare state. Just people need to understand. It was Ludwig von Mises who figured out this is what causes the boom and the bust cycle. They call it the business cycle, but it's the government's inflationary counterfeit money cycle is what it is. And that's what causes the giant booms and then the very real busts. So even if you think libertarians are all wet about everything, well, whatever, they're right about gold money. We have to have hard money because as long as the government can print money, first of all, they'll create a massive world empire with an unlimited budget, a $7 trillion budget every year, because they think that they can just print money forever to get away with it. And they'll get, way out of our control in the first place. But then even when we think it's good times, that's just when they're setting us up to pull the rug out from under us and everybody has to do a giant reset like we did in 99 and 2008. And we were due for one when they did the COVID lockdowns. So that sort of substituted for the recession of 20, the same time they again did the giant bailouts to make up for it again.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that, actually. But the other thing I'll say is, even though you and I'm sure, have disagreements when it comes to the welfare state, whether you're talking about Democrats, Republicans, left-wing media, right-wing media, I'm sorry, but no one is doing better coverage of foreign policy than the libertarians. Antiwar.com is fantastic. Okay, absolutely fantastic. And I just find myself gravitating toward your content when it comes to these issues because you're well read, you know what you're talking about, and you don't lean into ridiculous fear mongering to scare Americans into essentially consenting to these endless wars that do nothing to benefit the American people. And so to that point, I do want to talk a little bit about the Tucker thing because, I watched a lot of Tucker's content prior to agreeing to go on his podcast because prior to that, I had all these ideas in my head about who Tucker is because I remember him from his neocon days. I remember him from, his Fox News days where he said all sorts of things that I vehemently disagreed with. And I didn't know if it made sense for me to have a conversation with him. So I started listening to his podcast daily and realized he's super remorseful about his neocon days. He apologizes for it on a regular basis. And he speaks to, and I think it's sincere, he speaks to the real struggles of Americans, particularly young Americans who can't afford houses, don't think they can afford to get married and have kids. It is leading to a level of despair in this country that has been completely neglected by our political elite. And let's also keep it real by our corporate media and mainstream legacy media. So when he decided to have Nick Fuentes on, I kept an open mind, even though I know about all the things that Nick Fuentes has said. I know that he has, celebrated Hitler. I know all that stuff, but I wanted to see, okay, what's going to come out of this conversation? And I feel that there has been this misconception about how Tucker didn't push back against Nick Fuentes at all, when he very clearly did, and drew a distinction between what Tucker Carlson believes and what Nick Fuentes believes. Nick Fuentes still believes, and he said it during this podcast interview, that the problem is this global, organized Jewry. Tucker Carlson pushed back on that and said, no, I totally disagree. And in fact, when you pin this on the Jews, all you do is discredit everyone who is specifically critical of Israel. And so this effort to cancel him, I don't think is really just about Nick Fuentes. I think it's about everything that Tucker has been saying in pushing back against the foreign policy that now several administrations in this country have engaged in, including the fact that we've supported Israel, regardless of who's in power there, regardless of what they have done in that region of the world. That's my take. It doesn't mean that you have to defend Nick Fuentes, but I am defending the idea that two consenting adults sit down and have a conversation without having this organized campaign meant to destroy the interviewer, in this case, Tucker Carlson. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I totally agree with you. And you're especially on the point about, well, on all of it, but especially the thing to focus on here is the thing about how they don't mean it. This isn't about Nick Fuentes at all. This is about Tucker Carlson's turn against Israel and against the war party overall. And they've decided they have something that they think that they can use against him, which parentheses ain't gonna work anyway, Jack. Tough luck. But that's what they're trying to do. And of course, anyone who watched the interview saw the same interview you did, where all this talk about platforming is so ridiculous. The guy's a journalist. The guy's interviewed Ayatollahs and God knows who, right? That's his job, is to interview people who are important in the news. And this guy, this young guy Fuentes, is now, it's undeniable. If you look at his audience size, he is a force to be reckoned with one way or another on the right. And Tucker clearly has been struggling to figure out how to deal with him. And I saw a clip where Fuentes said, sounds believable, I didn't ask Tucker, but seemed like maybe Tucker had asked Max Blumenthal and his wife to write this thing against him back years ago, kind of thing. Tucker's really trying to figure out a way to, do like a Mark Levin and cancel him. And he said in his interview with Candace Owens, I think this guy's a plant. Like he's COINTELPRO. He's sent to make all of us look bad like him for sidling up and agreeing with most of what we say, and then also saying a bunch of crazy stuff, And so, but the problem with that was he had no real evidence for that. And so Tucker, from on high now, Mr. Fox News big shot guy, even said in his criticism, he lives in his mom's basement. So it was a big guy swinging at a little guy, and then he missed. And he actually made a baseless accusation. So then he was in the position where he kind of had to eat a little crow. I think, he didn't tell me this or anything, but I think this is sort of the way I read the situation. After swinging and missing, he kind of had to go ahead and have him on and let the kid, define himself as he would. And of course, as you say, Tucker, and all anyone has to do is just watch this. People are like, they get a screenshot in their head of, oh no, a platforming happened or something. Watch what happened in the conversation. And as you say, it's Tucker explaining over and over and over again. Well, you say you have the same religion as me, but our religion teaches opposite of what you're saying your conclusions are here. And then it is true that Tucker didn't say I don't know how this is supposed to work. He brings the guy out to the middle of Maine. You know what I mean? He's not just gonna sit there and beat him over the head. But perhaps he could have said, hey man, you really have crossed the line in some of this stuff you've said about blacks and Jews and Hitler and this and that. Like this is some pretty, and he didn't hit him that hard on that. But the way I read that was that he was leaving Fuentes space to back down a little bit in a way and say, because in fact, like check out the difference between the Jews are all a bunch of traitors serving Israel and, well, Sheldon Adelson wasn't a neoconservative, just a Jewish Zionist. And so his Jewishness obviously informs his Zionism somehow. Okay, well that's true for a lot of Jewish Zionists, that Jewishness and Zionism seem to go together to them. Okay, but what does that say about the millions and millions and millions of American Jews? Doesn't say anything about them at all, does it? It's a completely different way of framing it. And so when Tucker said, okay, well, let's just draw our lines here and see, Fuentes seemed to back down from his own position quite a way. Now
you're right. Yeah, you're right about that. And
in a way, one more thing there is,
sure.
I've actually kind of been mulling this over because I think it represents a real crisis for the right and especially the anti-war and anti-Zionist right. That what are we gonna do with this guy? Before he made sure that he was so beyond the pale that like, fine, he has his corner over there. But now he's going, yeah, it's me and Tucker and Candace against the war party. And it's like, now listen, man, you're still an avowed Hitlerian and whatever, to whatever degree. And look, I'm not the greatest connoisseur of the guy, but I've seen some pretty astounding clips before, okay? I've not watched hours and hours, but I know about him that And I know the origin story that Ben Shapiro's what did this to him when he was just a kid. So it's almost a comic book movie. Like, this is where your villain came from, was he was so mistreated unfairly when he was too young, whatever. But now what does the entire anti-war right? And you see there's a giant faction fight on the right where the war party is going after, and not just the war party, but like, more mainstream Republican types are really going after Tucker and everyone anti-Zionist and hanging Fuentes around all of our necks. And it represents a real conundrum of what we're gonna do. Here he's trying to soften and sort of join up with a larger movement, but in a way that can really only cause them nothing but grief, right? To me, It seems like what he should do is he should just go full COINTELPRO against Israel and say, yes, he's a National Socialist. He shares the exact ideology of the Likud party, which is ethno-religious nationalism and exclusivism and collectivism at the expense of the other, which is what he believes in and which is what Benjamin Netanyahu believes in. Richard Spencer, who they previously made poster boy for the so-called alt-right back 10 years ago, he said, well, I don't see a problem with Zionism. I just want Zionism for white people here. That's all. And at one time, he challenged a rabbi at Texas A&M. I think it was a rabbi. It might have been a professor. I forget. But he challenged, I think it was a rabbi at Texas A&M and said, well, do you support open immigration to Israel? And he goes, well, of course. Oh, in fact, what he did was he sat there silent and he couldn't think of a thing to say. And then he just turned around and walked away, handing the point to the Nazi, to an avowed National Socialist. And so if Nick Fuentes really resents Israel, he ought to sidle up to them instead up to Tucker Carlson and friends.
I just think, especially as someone who was very much part of the cancel culture left at one point, especially after the 2016 election, attempting to silence people or censor people or punish people for having conversations, it doesn't work. In fact, all it does is help the very individual you are trying to crush become more and more popular. The only thing that works is engaging in debate, engaging in discussion. And, sunlight really is the best disinfectant. And I'm sorry, how many shows agreed to do sit-down interviews with a literal war criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was wanted by the International Criminal Court, gave softball interviews? And this is a guy who has literally engaged in mass slaughter, including of children. There's no campaign to cancel those shows. And I wouldn't want a campaign to cancel those shows. I covered some of those interviews. I critiqued those interviews, substantively. And then you just get to pushing, you move on, right? But this idea that it is beyond the pale for Tucker Carlson to sit down with, Nick Fuentes. And again, I have huge issues with things that Nick Fuentes has said. But compare him to, again, Netanyahu, who's actually killed people, wiped out entire bloodlines. No pushback on that. It's kind of amazing. Okay, so before we go, I did want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your latest project. So this is the Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy, which I'm super excited about. So tell me what this project is and what motivated you to launch it.
Well, thank you very much. It's the Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom. It's at scotthortonacademy.com. And it's long form courses by myself and other experts on crucial matters of foreign policy and freedom, like in the title there, the title is also a homage to Ron Paul's book. That's a collection of great speeches he gave, Foreign Policy and Freedom there, Foreign Policy of Freedom. Anyway, it's me giving about a 30-hour course on everything I know about America's Middle East wars for the last 45 years, essentially in my lifetime since the Jimmy Carter years. And walking you through all of that step by step and showing how it really is one long story all the way through. And I covered this stuff for a very long time. I've done more than 6,000 interviews on my show. It took me a while before I could really see the whole thing as one good timeline where I think I got all my puzzle pieces filled in and I'm ready to help you guys catch up. So the purpose of the thing is essentially for everybody to be as well informed on foreign policy as I am, to get everybody caught up to where I've been. I've been doing this antiwar.com things and more than 20 years now. Since 2004 is when I first started writing and working for them. And so I've been completely immersed in all of this. And I just want everybody to be as effective as possible. As you showed in your clip there, the war hawks, like Bill Kristol, and he's the king of the hawks. Is the axis of crystal. The neoconservatives that lied us into war is what Justin Raimondo called them back then. There's a king of them and he's worthless. He's got nothing. And it wasn't just that I'm so great. It was that he absolutely has nothing. And it's the same with all these war hawks. I know it happens every time you go on Piers Morgan and go up against these hawks. Every time Dave Smith or anybody informed goes up against the hawks, they get completely destroyed. And so my thing is, well, what if there were just thousands and thousands and thousands more people who are really capable of taking this stuff on? And so not everybody can sit and read, 15 Chomsky books or whatever. So this is going to be me taking you through it. And then I have a bunch of great experts and a bunch of other great courses and more coming soon, including I have a Lutheran scholar who is debunking Christian Zionism and is doing a great course on that. And that'll be, up there within a few weeks from now. So we're going to be adding more and more courses all the time. And I'm really proud of it. We've got a really great reaction so far, tons of subscribers and a lot of great emails of positive response. So I'm feeling really good about it. And by the way, I asked my guy and he set it up. So we got a promo code Anna for the rest of the week until midnight Friday night. You'll get 10% off.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. And everyone, please check it out because you've just been an amazing resource for people who actually want to learn the truth about US foreign policy and its ramifications and who we're actually allied with and whether or not it makes sense for these individuals or these countries to be considered our allies. Scott, you're wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time and being so generous with us. And I hope you'll come back soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.